Welcome to all of you. So glad that we could all be together for this. My name is Juniper. I'm the managing producer for Feldenkrais Access, and I'm very pleased to be here with Maggy Burrowes to discuss her upcoming program, Well Connected, which starts on May 29th with a live free class. Maggy, would you like to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Good to see you.
Great. So we'll jump right in. We have had a couple of questions, and I'll get started with those. And if you have a question for Maggy or a comment, if you'd like to say anything, please send a message into whichever platform you're joining from. So the first question, we had a question from someone about cranial cervical instability. Can you say something about this and how it relates to hypermobility?
So I had a little look because, this is, as usual, this is all about how we can learn to change elements of ourselves that are problematic. And that sounded very much like a medical diagnosis of sorts. And it's really all about, hypermobility is all about having different joints that are looser than you would expect them to be, looser than is ideal for the design. But it varies a lot from person to person which joints are problematic. And it's clear to me that someone might get a diagnosis of having this abnormal free motion in the spine between the skull and the neck from an injury like whiplash. And then what happens is that people with hypermobility as a condition are more likely to suffer those kinds of injuries. And I was immediately reminded of, I think I gave myself whiplash, but dancing too enthusiastically as a teenager.
Maggy, maybe you could say something more about your experience living with hypermobility and what has inspired you to teach this program
Oh, yeah.
upcoming.
Yeah. No, I'd love to. I'd love to. So I finding out more and more about this selection of conditions. It's not just one condition, it's a variety of overlapping conditions. At this great age, it was really only in my 50s that I realized that I had something that had a name. Before that, I just felt that I was dealing with an array of complex, inconvenient or problematic or sometimes quite severe symptoms without realizing that they all came under this banner. And so the banner of having tissues that are lax, joints that are loose, ligaments and tendons that don't do the job that the majority of ligaments and tendons are designed to do. This is something that just I discovered about myself over time. The first thing I remember being told by somebody else was that I had poor ankle posture. My ankles kind of sank inwards. And and then a little while after that, I started to have problems with my knees, but they were a bit random, these knee problems. One knee would hurt one day, and then a different knee, the other knee would hurt the next day. So it didn't seem to me that the structural story that I expected when I was 14 made any kind of sense. And from then on, really, a kind of worsening condition that is very common for women with some version of hypermobile spectrum syndrome conditions, which is, I think, when the hormones kick in. This seems to be something that is well understood and well recognized in the small but determined group of people who are studying this condition, is that what happens for women post-puberty is that a lot of it worsens. And I suspect that's down to the important role of estrogen in preparing female structures to give birth. So that's my theory. And so those of us who already had sort of, slightly difficult issues around our periods, might have had much worse problems simply because we were dealing with this extra element. And so then the next thing that happened was I developed asthma. And that's a less obvious element of this condition, that also your organs are affected. You can have problems with your breathing, you can have problems with your swallowing, you can have problems with your digestion. So it's important to understand that this is the collagen structures are all the way through your system. They're about the condition of your muscles, they're about the condition of your fascia, and they're about the condition of your skeleton and your joints. So you may be experiencing in any of these areas some kind of sense of having less stability or less integrity or less strength. And it could be one of the many syndromes. Up until recently, there were 13 different versions, and they've recently upped it to 14. And I'm feeling a little smug because I knew it would go up, and I think it'll continue to go up because it's very hard to pin down something that is about the structural integrity of the whole self and say this symptom is definitely this kind of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, stroke, hypermobility spectrum disorder, and that is a different version. There are some things I don't have. I don't have stretchy skin. Some people can pull their skin out in an amazing way. But I do have weird skin. I can write on my skin sometimes, and I just get my name comes up in a big red lump if I scratch my name onto my arm. And it varies. Sometimes it happens very easily, and sometimes it doesn't happen. So yeah, figuring out what you're dealing with when you have this condition can take quite a long time.
Maybe you can talk some more, Maggie, about some of the different ways in which hypermobility manifests for people who may be listening and wondering if they may be living with a hypermobile condition or some of these symptoms, and they may hear some of the things that you describe as something they themselves experience.
Yes, yes, and there's so many that do keep prodding me because I think more will come to me. I think that my pronated feet, the weight being on the inside of the soles of my feet, which therefore caused my knees to sink inwards, that's a postural thing that you can see quite early on. That's one of the ways that having joints that aren't stable in the way that you would expect might manifest. But another thing you might see, and you see this in a lot of young people, but it's something that most people would not be able to maintain, is being able to sit down on the floor between your own heels. And people call it W sitting because that's the shape the legs make. And a normal range of motion would be able to sit on your heels, to have a comfortable kneeling posture. But to be able to get your buttocks on the floor between your heels, that's when you look at your knees doing that, you can tell there's something not quite right about it. Uh, when I was younger, my sister and I, we both used to think we were double jointed. That was one of the terms that was around. We had a sense that we had this extra looseness, but we didn't think of it as being a condition so much as like an ability, something to sort of feel pleased and proud about. And that's one of the things that I think happens to maybe if you've had a lot of opportunities to run about and climb and develop your physical skills when you're very small, then you might just find yourself being a little bit bendy and acrobatic and feel confident in gymnastics and not think of it as something that's in quotes wrong with you. This isn't a disease as such. It's a different way of being that's actually enormously common. And then I think in terms of symptoms, something that I haven't seen anyone talk about, but I'm pretty sure is something that lots of us would have experienced. I used to get what were called growing pains. I'd get these weird aches in my structure, and they might be in the muscle. And my mum called it growing pains, and she gave me something called Fin and Salt, and that would ease it. But when I started reading, I thought it's a little bit like rheumatism, and I knew I was too young to have rheumatism. But some people with this condition develop very young, when they're very young, develop forms of rheumatism. And I think I was lucky that it wasn't more severe, that it was kind of manageable. But I would say the first really severe symptom was sciatica. And but by the time I had sciatica, I think I had other trapped nerves as well that didn't have a special name. So when the sciatica developed, I went to the physio, and the physio told me it was sciatica. And so I knew what was going on. But I used to get trapped nerves all through different parts of my spine. The person who was asking the question about craniocervical instability. If any part of your spine is unstable, then it can slip and trap your nerve. And then you get weird, random pains. You wake up and your elbow's hurting. You haven't banged it. It's not bruised. You have a pain in one joint in your finger. So something very specifically there. So, sciatica is the most obvious one. And sciatica, I think, is particularly interesting because that part of the spine is really not supposed to be that mobile. We're not supposed to be so free to twist and bend that area. The lumbar spine is designed to stably attach itself to the pelvis and make us give us a strong foundation for holding the head up. And so if that part of you is very loose and free, this is why I think of all the trapped nerves, sciatica is the one that people are most aware of and familiar with. I also started to develop digestive problems, and I think we have to be very careful what we eat. So that was another symptom that wasn't obvious. It wasn't obviously part of the same thing as the thing that was causing the sciatica. And then when I was much older and I began to understand there was a condition, I started to wonder if the fact that I'd never had strong lungs. I developed the asthma late in my teens, but I had never had any stamina. If I tried to run fast, I ran out of energy extraordinarily quickly. I was a very poor sports person, and it didn't take to any of the hockey as a good example, ordinary hockey, not ice hockey over here. They would make us run around the pitch as a warm up, but if I had to run all the way around the hockey pitch, that was it. That was my energy for the rest of the day. And so when I started to have knee problems, because I was kind of a canny kid, I wondered if the knee problems were because I didn't like PE, and it helped me not do PE. So the only bit of physical education, which is what PE stands for over here, the only bit of that I enjoyed was the dance class. But in the dance class, I discovered that I had no capacity to coordinate and organize myself. So I was a really classic example of the two left feet metaphor. Tripping over my own feet, not being able to follow verbal instructions. If someone sort of said, move your right foot forward, then your left foot forward, then move your right foot to the side, I'm just falling. I have no capacity to follow those kinds of instructions. But I loved to dance. So I had no trouble moving to music. Moving to music was very natural and very enjoyable. And as long as I was improvising, I was very happy. But if I was trying to learn a piece of choreography or follow somebody else's instructions, I was hopeless. And then the postural thing is interesting. When I was in my teens, I realized my chest was sagging. Oh, let's be careful of my microphone. My chest was sagging. I realized I'd kind of sunken in some way. And this is interesting from a Feldenkrais point of view. I counteracted it by lifting myself up. So I went, instead of sagging around like a miserable teenager, I went into this and lifted it up and created a problem in my spine that is still detectable, I think, by people who know how a spine is supposed to feel. Feldenkrais helped me enormously to improve it, but I can tell that the initial place of misalignment is still there. I wonder what else might be interesting for people. So I think trapped nerves, random pains, joints that suddenly hurt when you know you haven't done anything to trigger an injury. Are the less obvious things. The really obvious things are the unusual joints. And I only have, mine are not very visible. So some people, I'm going to show you that I can't do it. Yeah. Some people, they've got this, where the thumb will go all the way onto the hand, or the elbow will bend backwards into a bow shape. My knees do that a little, but my elbows don't do it. But what does happen is if somebody's pulling me, I feel as if the hand might come out of the socket. It's really disturbing feeling if I'm pulled. So I have to be very. I enjoyed martial arts classes, but the ones I really enjoyed were Tai Chi, because nobody's yanking you around in Tai Chi. But when I tried to do Aikido, I very quickly realized I couldn't let someone pull at me, because you either let go completely and you go flying, or you stabilize yourself and you stabilize yourself too much, and then your joints are under pressure. I could probably think of more. I mean, hopefully gives a bit of a sense of what people might look for. People stabilize themselves oddly. So one really visible sign is someone who wraps one leg around the other twice. So it's kind of they cross their legs, but they cross their legs and then cross them again. One knee goes around and then the foot comes around and tucks behind the calf. And you get this kind of lovely little twirl of legs rather than simply crossed legs. That's very common sign of hypermobility. Finding ways to feel stable when you don't feel stable. Lots of clenching. Paradoxically, people who are hypermobile will often tell you that they're very tense, and it's because they're holding on to keep everything together. They can't let it be loose, or they just feel like they would fall apart and collapse like a Jenga or a house of cards. And so they hold themselves, and then they think they're stiff people, not loose people. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
It's very interesting to hear you talk about it, Maggie. Could you please say something about how the approach you'll be taking in this course and how the Feldenkrais method can help people address some of the issues that aren't so pleasant about having hypermobility, about living with hypermobility?
Yes, I'm very excited to be putting this course together. And I'm very aware that it's going to be an interesting process, making it effective for as wide a range of people with this condition as possible. I would say the first thing is that what Feldenkrais lessons do that isn't always obvious, I think we say it, we talk about it, but it may not be completely clear, is every Feldenkrais lesson is always about the whole self. It's not about parts of the self. So even if a lesson seems to be focusing on, the way the shoulders are moving, or how much freedom there is in your neck, or how well organized your feet are to help you balance, always we are looking at the whole skeleton in motion. Always we're looking at all of the tissues and how they relate to each other. So I really am focusing this course on lessons that were like light bulbs for me in my own training, helping me begin to feel myself as a whole creature instead of a series of disorganized and uncomfortable parts, which is really how I felt. I didn't realize that was how I felt, but that was how I felt. So we will be looking at whole self movement always. We'll be looking at connecting the inside to the outside. So, we'll be using our breathing in the most effective way that we possibly can. We'll be emphasizing the things that Feldenkrais already does. Feldenkrais is already great for people with this condition, but we'll be particularly emphasizing going slowly so that you actually feel what you're doing much more clearly. Finding narrower boundaries within which to move, instead of looking always for, and this is very common with people who are very loose, looking for the boundaries by going as far as you possibly can and then pushing against the edges, to instead find this very classic Feldenkrais process of staying within what's easy, staying within a narrower percentage of what you're capable of. It's almost the opposite of a class that involves stretching. We almost never use a stretchy kind of movement, and hypermobile people can often be a little bit addicted to stretching because it's how they feel themselves as this sort of, going as far as they possibly can in any direction, and but that's not necessary. It's not required for Feldenkrais. It's not what makes Feldenkrais work. And then there's the pacing. We often don't pace ourselves well. We often push past our point of comfort without even realizing it. And then it's the next day that we wake up and think, oh, I overdid it. Now, that's not unusual for people who overdo things anyway, but it is particularly easy to do if the signals coming to you from your skeleton, from your joints, are not as clear as they need to be, not as clear as would help you organize yourself well. So I will be focusing a lot on embracing the joy of resting, embracing the joy of pausing, embracing the joy of going slowly and really feeling what's moving. We are this wonderfully watery creature, and when we move, everything is being gently activated from inside through the fascial layers. And that's something that once you start to feel it can be very exciting and also really give you a sense of, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually moving more than I think I am. Because we're very often moving more than we think we are.
Maggie, sorry to interrupt.
No, no, that's all right.
Would now be a good time to ask some questions that we've gotten in the chat?
I'm sure it would. I'm sure it would. And then other things might pop into my head that I want to make sure I don't forget to say, and I'll just say them.
Okay, great. We have a question from Evelyn who asks, do you think COVID might have caused a jump in symptoms in a person that previously only had knee and ankle problems, but now has painful hands, lactose and gluten intolerance, and pain everywhere?
Do you know what, Evelyn? I think that's very likely, but this is based on very recent research that I've been doing. So, one of the joys of preparing for the course has been the excuse to listen to a lot of great lectures on YouTube. And that's how I have become more aware of the relationship between aggravated inflammation through the system and some of these symptoms. So I think this is probably very common, that there's a lot of people out there living pretty well with their hypermobility. It's not causing them a great, and they might be aware of it, they might not be aware of it, they might have it under another label. But they're living with it quite well. And then something whacks the immune system for six. It aggravates inflammation through the system. And then suddenly there's a lot more symptoms to deal with than there were. And it's still part of the same syndrome, but suddenly it's much more problematic. Now, I knew this about myself, but I hadn't completely drawn this connection so that I had it very confidently. How I diagnosed myself was because I read a book about hypermobility that a friend had lent me. And I read all the symptoms that this woman was describing that she was dealing with. And I thought, oh, if only I were hypermobile, this would be what's wrong with me. And those symptoms included fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and asthma and weird skin. And I just thought, I've got all of those. And then I realized that the joints that were loose were not the blatantly obvious ones, but they were there. And the whole thing came together. So I think it can be very distressing if you've had a nasty infection and it's left you with these extra issues to deal with.
And I would encourage them to come to the class on May 29th and check out the program that you'll be teaching, Maggie, because they may find some improvements from that and find some optimistic feelings arise around some of the symptoms
Yeah.
that they're living with.
Oh, absolutely. It was a wonderful experience for me doing the training and slowly coming together, just coming into a state of greater wholeness and what I think of as kind of personal coherence. I felt more coherent. And those tools with me forever. You know, you don't lose them. You need to master them. You need to master pacing. You need to master going slowly. You need to start to trust that you can feel better. But once you know it, you know, you are empowered.
Great. We have a couple of questions from JD who is asking, can one develop symptoms later in life? And have there been studies linking anxiety to hypermobility?
Um, I'm sure there are studies because the people that I've been listening to are talking about studies. There's something very interesting about the way that this kind of physical instability can manifest itself in a kind of emotional anxiety as well. I started to get palpitations and they developed later on in life. I didn't have them when I was younger. And palpitations are one of the things that we commonly experience. Palpitations and something that I'm not going to be able to remember what it stands for, but people call it POTS, which is essentially the main obvious thing that happens is you stand up suddenly and you faint or nearly faint because your blood pressure changes very abruptly when you go from sitting to standing or from lying to standing. And the thing is, if your heart's pounding, you feel anxious even when there's no reason. So there's one of the things that I think is really important that is poorly understood in our lives is that there isn't a real difference between the things we're experiencing physically and the things we're experiencing mentally. Mentally, they're part of the same issue, but it does mean that if you can calm yourself, if you can soothe yourself so you can lower the state of hyperarousal you're in, then other symptoms of hypermobility, other effects of hypermobility start to improve. So I will be addressing that as part of what we're doing. I will be including the capacity for calming as part of the process because it's a vital process for us because we're often a little bit manic. And there's a very interesting overlap between people who are on both the autism spectrum or receiving an ADHD diagnosis who are also EDS. There's a massive overlap, which nobody's really quite sure about. I have my own ideas, but those ideas are not backed by research. So I like to chat about them, but I chat about them rather than make any kind of definite statements. But it fascinates me that I'm getting so many questions from you all about these things developing later in life because I think it is possible. And I think it's often that that someone's actually functioning very well with what you could perhaps call a mild version of the condition. And then something comes and knocks you off base, which could easily be something that causes anxiety. Stress is another thing that upsets the whole balance throughout your whole system. The injection of cortisol disrupts everything. Oh, we're going to run out of time. I'm so looking forward to talking to you all about this. It's going to be a lovely course. It's going to be good fun. It's going to be playful, but it's also going to be hopefully playing safely within our boundaries.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maggie. And thank you to everyone who joined us. And thank you to those of you who are watching now from the recording later on. And I hope to see you all on May 29th. Maggie, would you like to close us out?
Yes. Come along. Come prepared to discover an enormous affection for who you are and how you function and the way you are. You can love this condition once you understand it and know that there are things that can help you ameliorate the difficult parts, but have real enjoyment of the fun parts. Yeah.